The wind carried a hush across the canyon as a lone woman appeared at the edge of the Apache fires. Her steps were uneven, her face hidden beneath a torn shawl, yet her silence spoke louder than any cry. The warriors stirred, hands near their weapons, but the Alpha raised his palm and studied her with the patience of a man who had seen both betrayal and truth before. She was not simply seeking refuge from a brutal husband. Something deeper clung to her presence, a secret that shadowed the firelight itself. The camp waited, uneasy, as her trembling hands revealed what no one expected. That night would test the very meaning of compassion, and the Apache chief would discover a burden that could reshape everything he thought he knew about loyalty, pain, and blood. What secret did she carry into their firelit circle? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The canyon was hushed beneath a moon that spilled silver over the desert floor. Coyotes had gone silent, the air holding attention as though the very stones waited for something unspeakable to arrive. Fires burned in the center of the Apache encampment, each flame flickering against the walls of tents and brush shelters, painting shadows that leaned long and restless. Warriors gathered in quiet circles, their words low, their eyes steady. It was a night like many others, yet unlike any that had come before. From the darkness beyond the fires, a figure appeared. At first, the watchers thought it might be a lost deer, or perhaps some wandering settler foolish enough to cross Apache land at this hour. But the shape moved haltingly, each step uneven, bare feet scraping against the earth. A woman, thin and bruised, wrapped in a torn shawl that seemed almost to swallow her small frame, staggered into view. The warriors shifted quickly, hands instinctively finding the hafts of their spears and knives. A woman stumbling into camp at midnight was no ordinary event. Her face was obscured, her breath ragged, her silence heavy enough to still the circle of men. Then the Alpha Apache stepped forward. Tall, broad in the shoulders, his presence was enough to halt his warriors without a word. He raised his hand, palm outward, and the restless stirring ceased. His gaze fixed upon the woman, not with suspicion, but with a deep, measuring calm. The firelight touched the bruises across her cheekbones, the dark swelling near her temple, the dried blood at the corner of her lip. She did not weep, did not speak, yet her silence told a story the Alpha knew too well. Cruelty had driven her here, cruelty of a kind that left marks not only on flesh, but deep within the heart. She swayed once, nearly falling. The shawl slipped from her shoulders just enough to reveal her arms, thin and scarred, before she caught it back to her chest, as though clutching her very soul. The fabric itself was worn yet carefully made, woven with patterns foreign to the Apache eye, yet bearing stitches recently reinforced, as though the cloth had been both heirloom and hiding place. The Alpha Apache studied her for a long moment. His people waited for his command. Would he send her away, or open the circle to a stranger who might bring danger upon them all? The woman's lips parted, but no sound came. She simply sank to her knees at the edge of the firelight, the shawl still gripped in trembling fists. For an instant, she looked less like a refugee and more like someone who had carried a weight far beyond her years. The Alpha lowered himself, crouching so that his eyes were level with hers. He spoke no words, only let the silence stretch between them, an invitation without demand. Finally, her eyes lifted to meet his. They were eyes hollowed by pain, yet burning with something beyond it, something that asked for more than pity. The warriors shifted uneasily, still waiting for answers, and muttered in the old tongue, wondering what trouble she would bring. Another whispered of curses, yet none moved forward, for their chief had not yet given leave. The shawl fluttered in the night wind, revealing for an instant a faint symbol embroidered in its corner. The Alpha caught it with a glance, a crest, faintly European, belonging to settlers across the valley. That detail he kept to himself, though it tightened his chest. This woman's story was no simple escape. He extended his hand, palm upward. Slowly, the woman loosened her hold on the shawl, though not entirely. With a trembling hesitation, she placed her other hand, small, scarred, into his. The fires crackled. The people leaned closer, and in that fragile connection the night shifted. The Alpha knew then that she had not come seeking only safety. She had come bearing a secret, something hidden in silence, carried in the weave of that cloth, pressed into the very marrow of her bones. This night would not be forgotten. For within her story lay a truth that would test not only her strength but the spirit of the Apache themselves. The Alpha released her hand and rose. His voice carried low but steady through the firelit circle. "She will stay," no one argued. The woman, still kneeling, clutched her shawl closer, and in the stillness that followed, even the desert seemed to hold its breath. Dawn came slowly, spilling over the ridges like molten gold, softening the harshness of the desert night. Smoke from the campfires curled lazily skyward, mingling with the chill air. The Apache camp, restless from the stranger's arrival, moved with unusual silence. Children whispered rather than shouted. Even the dogs seemed subdued, as if the night's omen lingered. The beaten woman sat near the central fire, wrapped tight in her shawl. Though her wounds had been cleaned with herbs and her bruises dabbed with salves, she looked no less fragile, a figure half present, half fading. The shawl hung from her shoulders, concealing as much as it revealed. Women of the camp came near. They brought bowls of maize and warm water, their movements gentle but measured. Curiosity flickered in their eyes, curiosity tempered by caution. They had seen strays wander in before, runaway laborers, desperate settlers, children lost to the wilderness, but none quite like her. One of the elder women, grey-haired and steady, reached for the shawl. With a soft murmur, she examined the weave, letting her fingers trail the fabric as though reading a story within its threads. The stitches were careful but foreign, the wool finer than the hides they used, and the embroidery at the corner, a crest, half faded, spoke of another world entirely. She raised her eyes to the Alpha, who stood nearby, arms folded. He said nothing, but his silence was weightier than words. The woman clutched the shawl back to herself with sudden fierceness, as if fearful they might strip her of it. The gesture did not go unnoticed. A few warriors muttered under their breath, suspicion sharpening their tone. Why guard a piece of cloth so desperately unless it concealed something of worth or danger? Children, less cautious than their elders, edged closer. They studied her with wide eyes, unafraid. One small boy reached out, offering her a crude toy carved from wood. She accepted it with a faint smile, one of the first seen upon her face, and for a moment the burden seemed to lift. But her hand never left the shawl. The Alpha Apache knelt by the fire, setting his spear aside. His eyes met hers with the patience of a man accustomed to silence. He asked in measured words, "Your name?" Her lips trembled, but sound came only faintly, half-broken. "Mary." The camp stirred. Mary was a settler's name. The fact rippled through the listeners like a cold wind. Mary lowered her gaze. The shawl tightened around her shoulders as though it could hide her very identity. The Alpha spoke again, not pressing but steady. "Why here? Why us?" She hesitated. The flames crackled. Finally she whispered, "Because there is nowhere else left." The elders exchanged glances. Some saw only trouble ahead. Others saw the worn body of a woman too broken to bring harm. But all of them wondered what else she carried besides her bruises and silence. The day stretched forward. Mary remained at the fire, watched yet left in peace. The women continued their duties, grinding corn, tending to children, shaping clay. Still, they glanced at her often, measuring her presence against their own memories of betrayal and loss. Late in the afternoon, as shadows grew long, a group of young hunters returned. They bore rabbits and birds, their faces painted with dust. Seeing the stranger still seated among them, one frowned and asked the Alpha if she was to stay. His voice carried a note of challenge. The Alpha answered without hesitation. "She will stay. She's under our fire now." The hunters nodded, yet unease lingered. Shelter was one thing, trust another. That night, as stars pricked the dark sky, Mary lay upon a mat provided by the women. She turned the shawl over in her hands, fingers tracing the embroidered crest. In the shifting firelight, her eyes glistened, not merely with tears, but with the fear of a secret too heavy to confess. She pressed the fabric to her face as if it could swallow her sobs. The camp slept, but the Alpha, sitting awake at the fire's edge, watched in silence. He saw the shawl shimmer faintly with each flicker of flame, as though it was more than cloth, as though it was the keeper of something neither he nor his people yet understood. For the first time that day, Mary whispered to herself words no one else could hear. The desert winds carried them away before meaning could be caught. Yet the look in her eyes revealed it clearly enough. The truth lay hidden, and the shawl was its shield. The morning sun rose hard and clear, chasing away the cool breath of night. Its heat pressed down upon the Apache camp, turning the earth bright and sharp. Smoke from cook fires drifted lazily upward, carrying the smell of maize and roasted meat. Yet for Mary, the world was still shadowed. She sat at the edge of the central circle, the shawl tight around her shoulders, though the day already burned warm. Her skin beneath was a map of pain. Bruises purpling at her arms, welts across her back, faint scars that spoke of cruelties endured long before her flight. The Apache healer, a woman bent with age but steady of hand, knelt beside her. She carried a bowl of crushed roots mixed with warm water, the sharp smell of medicine rising from it. The healer did not ask questions. She simply touched Mary's shoulder and, with a gentleness born of long experience, peeled the shawl back. Mary flinched, clutching it tighter. "It must be done," the Alpha said softly from across the fire. He had given his warriors leave to hunt, so that only a few remained nearby. His voice carried neither command nor pity, but something heavier, a patience that pressed Mary toward trust. Slowly, she let the shawl slip. Beneath, her skin told a story the camp could not ignore. Purple bruises curved like storm clouds down her ribs. A welt ran across her shoulder as if left by a whip, and faint lines, pale and healed, traced her wrists. The healer breathed out softly, dipping her cloth into the bowl. She dabbed the mixture along the marks, humming low, a song of mending as old as the tribe itself. Mary closed her eyes, trembling, but did not pull away. Around them the camp grew still. Two women watched from a distance, their faces unreadable. One murmured that such wounds came not from accidents, nor from work, but from cruelty. The other nodded grimly. Mary kept her eyes lowered. In her silence, she seemed carved from the same stone as the desert cliffs. But when the healer touched one scar near her wrist, she gasped and drew the shawl tight again. Her lips parted, words catching before they formed. The Alpha stepped closer. "Who gave you these?" Her voice was faint, brittle. "My husband." The word hung in the air like smoke, acrid and heavy. A murmur rose among the women. To run from a husband was no small thing in the settler world, and to run battered meant a cruelty deeper still. Mary drew the shawl tighter, as though she might hide inside it. Her fingers trembled along its edges, pressing into the threads with desperate strength. It was not only comfort, it was her wall against their eyes, her last shield of dignity. But the Alpha had seen her grip before, and knew it was not only shame she clutched. He crouched low, his gaze fixed on hers. "That cloth, what lies within it?" Mary shook her head quickly, too quickly. "Nothing, only mine." Yet her voice faltered, and her eyes darted to the small embroidered crest near the corner. The Alpha's eyes followed, and though he said no more, the suspicion deepened. The healer, unaware of the shawl's hidden weight, continued her work. She bound Mary's arms with clean strips of cloth, wrapped salve-soaked leaves against her back, and laid gentle hands upon her brow. When it was done, she rose without ceremony and left the woman to her thoughts. Mary sat alone, the shawl now pulled around her once more, covering both bandages and scars. The desert wind stirred its edges, making the embroidery flash faintly in the light. She stared into the fire, lips trembling. In its flames, she seemed to see her husband's face, the fury that had burned in his eyes when she dared defy him. She saw the night she fled, the door left open, the stars above, the shawl snatched from its peg as the only thing she could carry. She had not left empty-handed, though. Her hand pressed once more against the folded corner of the cloth, where the threads were thicker, heavier, as though concealing more than wool. She closed her eyes. A tear slipped down her cheek and disappeared into the fabric. The Alpha remained near, saying nothing, yet his silence spoke enough. He had noticed. He always noticed. When the sun dipped low and the evening cooled, Mary rose stiffly and moved toward the women preparing food. She helped grind corn, her motions awkward but sincere. The shawl trailed from her shoulders, dust clinging to its hem. Children watched her curiously. Some giggled when she fumbled. Others whispered that she looked more ghost than woman. Still, she worked, determined to prove herself more than a burden. That night, when the fires burned low and the sky filled with stars, Mary lay with the shawl wrapped around her like a cocoon. Beneath its folds, her hand lingered over the hidden weight within. She whispered, so softly no ear could catch it, a prayer not to be discovered too soon, for the shawl did not only cover her wounds. It covered the secret that might shatter the fragile peace she had found at the edge of the Apache fire. The second night in camp was different from the first. Where before she'd been met with alarm and wary silence, now the eyes that followed Mary carried something more complicated. Curiosity. Some gazes softened, touched by pity. Others sharpened, distrust simmering beneath. A white woman, battered and broken, had entered their circle unbidden. Among the Apaches, stories spread quickly. As the fire crackled high, the tribe gathered in a wide circle. Songs rose into the desert night, drums carrying rhythm into the stars. Children clapped, women swayed, warriors stamped their feet. Mary sat slightly apart, the shawl drawn about her like armor, eyes fixed on the flames. She wanted to vanish into them, to become smoke that drifted upward and left no trace. But whispers carried, weaving through the music. Her husband hunts her. She hides something. Look how she clutches that cloth. Mary's hands stiffened on the shawl. She knew the women had seen her trembling earlier, seen her press her fingers too tightly into the folds where the embroidery thickened. Secrets, no matter how deeply buried, had a way of breathing beneath the surface. The Alpha sat across from her, silent, watchful. In the shifting firelight, his face looked carved from stone, his eyes steady on hers, even when she tried to look away. At last, he spoke, not loudly, but with enough weight that the circle hushed. "Why have you come here, Mary?" The use of her name startled her. She had not given it to him. She had spoken it only once to the healer. Yet from his lips it sounded not invasive, but inevitable, as though he had always known. She swallowed hard. "I had no place else." "That is not enough," he said. The fire popped, sending sparks spiraling upward. All eyes were upon her now. Mary felt as though the desert itself pressed against her chest, demanding air she could not take. She wanted to tell the truth, that her husband's fists had driven her out, that his cruelty had threatened to snuff the last spark of life within her. But the greater truth, the one buried in her shawl, sat like a stone in her throat. So she whispered, "I only wanted to live." A murmur passed through the circle. The Alpha studied her, his silence heavy, then gave a slight nod. He did not press further. Instead, he motioned for the singing to resume. Relief washed over her, but it was thin, fragile. She knew the questions had only been delayed, not forgotten. Later, when the music faded and the camp began to sleep, Mary remained by the fire. The healer approached, bringing a bowl of warm broth. She set it before Mary with a faint smile, then lowered herself beside her. "You hold yourself like a bird with a broken wing," the old woman said softly. Afraid to fly, afraid to rest, Mary glanced down. The firelight glowed against the threads of her shawl, making the embroidery shimmer faintly. She pulled it tighter around herself. "It is not only pain you carry," the healer murmured. "There is something more. I see it in your eyes. You guard it too fiercely." Mary shook her head quickly. "No, only memories." But the words felt thin, unconvincing even to herself. The healer laid a weathered hand upon Mary's. "When the time comes, the fire will show what the dark tries to hide. Secrets do not sleep forever." Then she rose, leaving Mary with the broth untouched, the shawl clutched even tighter. That night, Mary lay awake long after the camp slept. Coyotes howled in the distance. The stars above seemed endless, pitiless, cold. She pressed her cheek to the shawl, breathing in the faint scent of smoke it had gathered. Her fingers lingered again over the hidden fold, feeling the small, hard shape within. It was not large, but it was enough to undo her. Memories rose unbidden, her husband's drunken rage, the night she discovered the thing he swore must never be known, the desperate choice to flee. She remembered his voice roaring through the walls of their cabin. "If you ever take it, I will kill you myself." Her heart beat hard against her ribs. She closed her eyes and prayed the Alpha would not ask again. For if the shawl opened, if its secret spilled before the fire, there would be no going back. As dawn neared, she finally drifted into a restless sleep. And in her dreams, the shawl unraveled thread by thread, revealing what she feared most, not her wounds, but the truth buried deeper than any scar. When she woke, the Alpha was already standing near, his gaze as steady as ever. He said nothing, but in his silence she heard the promise. The fire had not yet demanded her secret, but it would, and when it did, there would be no hiding. The desert morning was sharper than Mary expected. The sun, though only just risen, already burned against the horizon, pulling long shadows through the camp. Smoke drifted from the dying fire. Women knelt to grind corn. Children ran, chasing each other's laughter through the dust. The world moved with purpose, as though last night's questions had dissolved with the dark. Yet Mary felt none of their ease. She rose stiffly, the shawl wrapped tight around her, and scanned the horizon as if expecting the shape of a man to rise out of the sand. Her husband was far, she told herself. He would not dare follow her into Apache lands. And yet the fear persisted, like a burr stuck beneath the skin. The Alpha came to her then, his steps measured, his expression unreadable. He stopped a short distance away, arms folded. "You did not sleep," Mary shook her head. "Sleep and I are not friends." His gaze dropped briefly to the shawl. She caught the flicker of his eyes and held her breath. Would he ask again? Would he demand to know what she held? But instead he said, "Fear eats more than hunger. You must not let it." Her lips parted, ready to answer, but before she could, the camp stirred with sudden alarm. A boy came running in, panting, his small chest heaving. "Tracks!" he shouted in Apache, the words tumbling out in haste. "A rider!" Coming from the east, the Alpha's head snapped toward the boy. The quiet that followed was heavier than any shout. Warriors rose, hands tightening on bows and spears. Mary's knees weakened. East was the direction of her old cabin. East was where he would come from, her husband. The Alpha's eyes returned to her, piercing. "Is it him?" Mary's throat closed. She wanted to say no, to deny it, but the image was too clear. A tall man, broad-shouldered, face twisted in rage, his horse lathered with sweat as he pushed it hard across the desert. She nodded just once. The Alpha did not question further. He gestured sharply, sending warriors toward the ridge. They moved like shadows, swift and silent. Others gathered the children, ushering them away from the open ground. Mary remained frozen, clutching the shawl. Her secret throbbed against her chest, as though it too had a heartbeat, as though it sensed the danger riding closer. The healer appeared at her side, resting a firm hand on her arm. "If he comes, will he take you?" Mary's voice cracked. "He will try. He thinks I belong to him." The healer's dark eyes softened, but her grip tightened. "Then we must show him you belong elsewhere." Minutes dragged. The camp waited in stillness, every sound magnified, the whisper of wind, the distant cry of a hawk. Then a figure crested the horizon, a man on horseback, dust rising in his wake. Even from afar, Mary knew the set of his shoulders, the tilt of his hat. Her breath caught. The Alpha raised his hand. Warriors readied their bows, but he held them back. "Not yet," he commanded. The rider drew closer until his face became clear. Weathered skin, eyes like cold iron, jaw clenched in fury. "Mary's husband," His horse snorted and stamped as he reined it to a halt just beyond the camp's edge. "Mary!" His voice cracked across the distance like a whip. "You come out now, or I'll burn this camp to the ground." Gasps rippled through the Apache women, but the warriors held fast, awaiting the Alpha's signal. The Alpha stepped forward, calm as stone, his presence filling the space between them. "This land is not yours," he called. "Leave it," the husband spat into the dust. "She's mine. She's my wife. And what she's got wrapped in that rag belongs to me too." His eyes slashed toward Mary. The shawl seemed to burn under his gaze, its secret trembling against her. Mary staggered back, every eye now on her. How could he know? Had he seen her take it? Or was he only guessing, driven mad by suspicion? The Alpha did not move. "She came here seeking shelter. She will find it." The husband's face twisted into a sneer. "You don't know what you're harboring. That woman's a thief, a liar. She carries poison in that shawl of hers. Give her to me or you'll regret it." Mary's hands shook. The world tilted. His words were daggers, each one slicing closer to the truth. She wanted to scream, to deny, but her voice would not come. The Alpha lifted his chin. "If she carries something, it is hers to reveal, not yours to claim." The standoff stretched long and taut. Dust swirled around the horse's hooves. Mary's husband's eyes darted to her again, blazing with fury, and she knew with a sick certainty he would not stop. He would come again and again until the shawl's secret was torn from her. At last, with a growl, he jerked the reins. The horse wheeled, and in a cloud of dust he retreated eastward. But his voice carried back over his shoulder. "You can't hide forever, Mary. I'll be back. And when I come, no Apache alive will keep you from me." Silence returned, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Mary's knees gave way, and she sank into the dirt, clutching the shawl so tightly it hurt. The Alpha approached, standing over her like a shadow. His words were quiet but immovable. "You cannot run from what you carry. One day the fire will demand it, and when that day comes, you must be ready." Mary closed her eyes, tears sliding down her face. She knew he was right. The secret would not sleep much longer. The morning after her husband's threat, the Apache camp was no longer the same. Where before there had been cautious acceptance, now there was an edge in every glance. The men whispered low, the women studied her from behind grinding stones, and the children, once bold enough to tug at her skirt, now gave her wide berth. Mary felt the change, as surely as she felt the desert wind against her skin. She drew the shawl closer, though the air was already hot, and tried not to meet their eyes. Every thread of its weave seemed to burn against her skin, not with warmth, but with guilt. At the well, two women spoke as Mary approached. Their voices hushed, yet the words reached her. "She brings danger. Her man will come again. And what does she hide? That rag she clutches like gold." The words stung. She turned away before they could see the tears rising, but she knew the whispers would not end. By midday, the Alpha summoned her. She followed him into the shade of a tall mesquite tree, where only the healer joined them. The Alpha stood with his arms crossed, the healer seated on a rock, her eyes patient but sharp. "You cannot stay silent forever," the Alpha said, his voice calm but firm. "Your husband will return. The people must know what shadow he chases." Mary's throat tightened. "If I tell, it will bring worse than danger. It will bring ruin," the healer tilted her head. "And if you do not tell, ruin will still find you." Mary's fingers twisted into the shawl. The shape, hidden in its folds, seemed to grow heavier, pressing like a stone against her chest. She wanted to speak, to release the truth into the air, but the memory of her husband's words bound her tongue. "If you ever take it, I will kill you myself." Her silence stretched too long. At last, the Alpha gave a small nod, though his eyes held disappointment. The fire always reveals what the dark conceals. Remember that. He turned away, leaving Mary with the healer. The old woman touched her arm. "Secrets eat the soul like rust eats iron. Do not wait until nothing is left." Mary lowered her head. "I am not ready." That night the camp gathered again by the fire. Yet the songs were subdued, the laughter dimmed. Mary sat apart, and though the flames licked high, she felt cold. The weight of silence pressed her down until she thought her bones might crack beneath it. A child's voice pierced the heavy air. A small boy crept close, eyes wide, staring at the shawl. "Why do you hold it so tight?" he asked. "Is there something inside?" Mary startled, clutching the fabric against her chest. The circle quieted, every face turning. The boy's innocent question rang louder than any accusation. Mary's lips trembled. "It is only a cloth, nothing more." But the lie sat bitter on her tongue, and she saw in their eyes that few believed her. The Alpha's gaze met hers across the fire. He said nothing, yet his silence was heavier than words. Later, alone in her shelter, Mary unwrapped the shawl just enough to touch the hidden object within. Her fingers brushed its hard edges, and memories surged. Her husband's fists, the night she fled. The desperate clutch of this thing, as though it were the only piece of her life she could still claim. She whispered into the dark, "I cannot let it go. I cannot," but already she felt the fabric fraying, not in thread but in trust. The camp's patience thinned. Her silence drew lines between her and those who had given her bread, water, shelter. And somewhere in the night, beyond the ridge, a coyote howled. Mary shivered, for she knew it was not just her husband who stalked her now. It was the secret itself, restless, unwilling to stay hidden much longer. The desert did not forgive silence, and neither would the fire. The desert sun was merciless that week, beating down on the canyon and wringing sweat from every living thing. Within the Apache camp, life moved on. Hunts were made, water carried, fires stoked, but an uneasy shadow lingered. Mary felt it in the way people glanced her way, in the pauses of their conversations when she drew near. The silence weighed heavier than the desert heat, but beyond their circle, her husband moved like a vulture on the wind. He had returned to the trading post 2 days' ride away, his face swollen with rage, his voice thick with whiskey. There, among rough men with desperate pockets, he began to spin his tale. "She's a thief," he growled, slamming his fist on a table. "She took what was mine and ran to the Redskins to hide. They think they can shelter her, but they don't know what she's got wrapped in that rag." The men listened. Some laughed, others leaned in. Talk of Apache camps was dangerous, but talk of something worth stealing that sparked interest. Her husband lowered his voice, letting the word gold slip between his teeth like bait on a hook. He didn't name it outright, not yet, but the suggestion was enough. By night's end, 3 men agreed to ride with him. Drifters mostly, men who had nothing to lose. They were promised a share of whatever Mary carried. What they wanted was clear: coin, whiskey, maybe a woman to drag back if they lived through it. Mary, back in the camp, sensed none of this in detail, but her bones told her danger was brewing. She woke often at night, clutching the shawl, convinced she heard hoofbeats in the distance. Each time the camp lay still. Yet the unease grew sharper. The healer noticed her hollow eyes and spoke gently one morning. "The desert shifts, Mary. I feel winds stirring that bring trouble." Mary managed a thin smile. "The trouble already knows my name." The Alpha, too, was restless. He paced the ridge at dusk, eyes scanning the horizon, waiting. He did not tell Mary, but the scouts had found tracks again, more than one rider this time. He feared that her husband was not alone. That evening, as the fire burned, the Alpha gathered the men. Their voices rumbled low, serious. Mary sat apart, catching only fragments, words like attack, protect, outsiders. She felt her heart tighten. This camp, which had shown her a fragile kindness, was now preparing to bleed for her sake. When the circle dispersed, the Alpha approached her. "Your man does not come alone." Mary's lips parted, but no words came. Her hands tightened on the shawl, its hidden weight like a brand on her chest. "You bring a storm upon us," he said, not with anger, but with a heavy truth. "Storms cannot be bargained with. They must be faced." Tears burned in her eyes. "I never wanted this. I only wanted to live." "Then you must decide," the Alpha said, "whether your secret is worth the lives it will cost." The words struck harder than any blow. That night Mary sat by herself at the edge of camp, staring out at the dark horizon. Her husband's voice echoed in her memory. His fists, his rage, the way he had snarled about what must never be taken. Her fingers slipped beneath the folds of the shawl, brushing the hard shape within. It seemed to hum in her grip, as though alive with its own hunger. Was it truly worth lives? Worth this fragile piece she had stumbled into? She wanted to throw it into the fire, to let the flames consume it. Yet when her hands trembled toward the embers, she pulled back. To give it up was to give up the last proof of what she had endured, the last shred of her defiance. Behind her, the healer's voice came soft in the dark. "Sometimes, child, what we clutch is what destroys us." Mary did not answer. She only held the shawl tighter, eyes fixed on the horizon where storm clouds seemed to gather, though the night was clear. Out there, her husband rode closer with men at his back, and soon the desert would not be silent. The camp woke with a chill that morning, though the sky promised heat before long. Mary stirred from restless sleep, her shawl pulled tightly around her. She had dreamed of fire, of it consuming her, of the threads unraveling in her hands until nothing remained but ash. She woke clutching the bundle tighter, the hidden weight pressing its accusation into her ribs. She tried to busy herself with small tasks, gathering wood and carrying water, but the whispers still lingered. Some women turned away, their eyes sharp with doubt. Others offered small, fleeting smiles, but even those carried hesitation. It was the children who broke the distance first. A little girl, no more than 6, tugged gently at Mary's skirt as she bent by the well. The girl's black eyes were wide, curious but not cruel. "Does your cloth tell stories?" she asked, pointing to the embroidery that wound across the shawl. Mary blinked. "Stories?" The child nodded solemnly. "All cloths do. My mother says the patterns carry memory." Mary glanced down. The shawl's threads shimmered faintly in the morning light. For the first time, she noticed how its weave had been mended and remended, stronger where it had once been torn. Perhaps it did carry stories, though not the kind she was ready to speak aloud. Kneeling, Mary smoothed the child's hair. "It carries stories I'm still learning how to tell." The little girl grinned, satisfied, and darted off. Mary's chest loosened, just a little. Later that day, one of the warriors approached her. Tall Elk, a broad-shouldered man with a scar across his cheek. His expression was stern, but his tone was respectful. "You fetch water as if to run from shadows." "You do not need to." Mary paused, unsure how to answer. "Shadows follow whether I run or not." Tall Elk studied her in silence, then nodded. "True, but sometimes shadows are lighter when shared." He held her gaze for a moment before striding away, leaving Mary strangely steadied by his words. By evening, a small shift had taken root. The same women who once whispered gave her a chance to sit among them while grinding corn. They did not speak much to her, but they did not turn their backs either. It was enough, a beginning. That night, as the fire burned, the Alpha sat across from her once more. His voice carried no judgment, only observation. "The people begin to see you." Mary lowered her eyes. "I don't deserve it. Perhaps not. But sometimes what we deserve and what we need are different things." The words struck deep. Mary thought of her husband's threats, of the way his shadow grew longer each day. What she needed was shelter. What she felt she deserved was far less. The healer joined them then, carrying a small bundle of herbs. She passed Mary a steaming cup. "For sleep," she said simply. "You cannot fight fear on an empty spirit." Mary accepted it, hands trembling. "Why do you help me when I bring nothing but trouble?" The healer's eyes softened. "Because once, long ago, I too was a woman who ran, and someone helped me. Kindness is not weighed in coin, child. It is passed from hand to hand." Mary sipped, the bitter taste grounding her. For the first time in many nights, warmth spread through her that was not fear. When the camp drifted to sleep, Mary remained by the fire. She unwrapped the shawl just slightly, enough for the flames to glint off the hidden object. She stared at it, torn between confession and silence. Footsteps approached. Tall Elk stood there again, his shadow stretching long in the firelight. He said nothing, only sat a few paces away. His presence was steady, quiet, not pressing. Mary looked down at the shawl and then at him. "If you knew what I carried, you might not sit so near." Tall Elk met her gaze calmly. Perhaps, or perhaps it does not matter. A burden shared is lighter even if we cannot see what it is. Tears stung Mary's eyes. She quickly closed the shawl and turned away, unable to speak. But something within her shifted, like a thread loosening in a knot too long bound. She still clutched her secret. But now, for the first time, she did not feel entirely alone in carrying it. Above, the stars burned sharp and bright. Somewhere to the east, her husband rode closer with his ragged company. Yet here, for a fleeting moment, Mary felt the faint warmth of trust begin to weave itself through the cold edges of her silence. The morning broke restless. A hawk circled high above the Apache camp, its shadow sweeping across the ground like a warning. Mary rose with unease pressing at her chest. She could not say why, but every sound seemed sharper, the creak of wagon wood, the barking of dogs, the hush of wind through the cottonwoods. Something was coming. By midday, the first sign arrived. A boy, lean and quick-footed, ran back from scouting with breathless words. Riders to the east. 3, maybe 4 miles. A ripple moved through the camp. Warriors stiffened, women gathered children closer, and the Alpha's eyes narrowed. He asked no questions, only rose and gave quiet orders. Men began to string bows, check rifles, and move with purposeful calm. Mary felt the blood drain from her face. She knew who rode behind that cloud of dust. Her husband had found her trail. She tried to keep busy, helping the women gather supplies, but her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped a pot into the fire. At last, she stepped away, walking toward the edge of camp where the scout had returned. That was where she saw it, a bent, rusted horseshoe, half buried in the dust. She picked it up, her throat tight. It was old, battered, but she knew the mark etched faintly into its iron. Her husband had branded even his horseshoes, like cattle, as if to leave his mark on everything he touched. The sight of it made her knees weaken. She clutched the shoe to her chest, her shawl falling loose as she whispered, "He's close." Behind her, a voice answered, "Who is close?" Mary turned sharply. It was tall Elk watching her carefully. She hid the shoe within the shawl, shaking her head. "No one." His eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. He only looked toward the horizon, where the dust rose faintly against the sky. "They will come here," he said. "You must be ready, ready." The word mocked her. She had run with nothing but a shawl and her secret. There was no ready for this. By dusk, the riders were close enough that even those within the camp could see the faint outline of horses against the ridge. The Alpha stood tall by the fire, his warriors beside him. They were prepared but not reckless. This was not yet battle. It was warning. The healer came to Mary's side, placing a firm hand on her arm. "Stay near the fire. Do not run. Fear feeds the wolf that chases you." Mary nodded faintly, but her heart hammered. Each beat seemed to echo. "He is coming, he is coming." When the riders finally appeared at the edge of the hollow, the air thickened. Her husband rode at the front, his hat pulled low, his eyes shadowed but sharp. Behind him, 3 rough men lingered, their rifles across their laps. They looked like drifters bought for coin, men who cared nothing for cause, only for the weight of payment. Her husband's voice carried across the hollow. "You've got something that belongs to me." The Alpha did not move. His voice was calm but firm. "There is nothing here that belongs to you." The man laughed, harsh and cold. "A wife belongs to her husband. That's the law. That's God's word." Mary's stomach twisted. Every syllable was a chain being thrown back over her shoulders. The Alpha's gaze shifted, steady as stone. "No man owns a woman in this place." For a moment, silence hung between them. The husband's men shifted uneasily, sensing the tension. But the man only sneered. "You think you can hide her here? Apache sheltering a white woman? You'll draw the soldiers down on your heads. They'll burn your camp to ashes." The Alpha's jaw tightened, but he gave no ground. "If the soldiers come, we will face them. But tonight, you will leave this place." Mary's husband spat into the dirt.
"She'll crawl back to me."
"They always do." His eyes cut toward Mary, burning with hatred and possession. "You hear me, girl? You think you've found safety here? You think they'll protect you when they know what you carry?" The words struck her like a whip. Her secret throbbed in the shawl, pressed against her body. She could almost hear it crying out to be revealed, but she said nothing. She stood frozen, the bent horseshoe still hidden within her grasp. At last the riders turned. Her husband cast one final glare across the firelight, his voice dripping with menace. "Tomorrow or the next day or the day after, I'll come again. And when I do, no Apache bow will keep her from me." Then he wheeled his horse, dust rising behind him, his men following like shadows swallowed by night. The camp exhaled slowly. Children whimpered. Warriors lowered their weapons. The fire popped, filling the silence with small sparks. Mary sank to her knees, trembling, the horseshoe falling into the dirt at her feet. The Alpha picked it up, studying the branded iron, before handing it back to her. "Your shadow has a name," he said quietly. Mary closed her fingers around the shoe, tears stinging her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "And he won't stop until I'm broken or buried." The Alpha's gaze did not waver. "Then we will not let him." For the first time, Mary wanted to believe those words. Yet in her heart she knew shadows never vanish easily. The night after the rider's appearance, no one in camp slept deeply. Every snapping branch or distant howl of coyote tightened the skin of the people's nerves. Mary sat awake beside the fire, shawl wrapped around her, feeling the weight of her secret heavier than ever. She had seen the way her husband's eyes lingered, as if he already knew what she carried. At dawn, the Alpha called his people together. From his lodge, he brought out the war drum, a hide stretched taut over carved cedar, painted with black and red lines that spiraled inward like storm clouds. 2 young men carried it into the open, and when the Alpha struck the first beat, the sound rolled across the camp like thunder in the mountains. Men, women, and children gathered. Some faces were solemn, others tense with fear, but none turned away. The Alpha's voice rose steady over the drum. "The riders are not gone. They wait, they will test our strength. We must be ready, not only for ourselves, but for the children and for the stranger who has sought our fire." Mary felt every eye shift toward her for a breath. She lowered her gaze, cheeks burning. Plans were made swiftly. Scouts would watch the ridges. Women and children would prepare to flee deeper into the canyons if needed. The warriors sharpened arrows, checked their rifles, and whispered the old songs of battle. Yet beneath the tension ran something stronger than fear, a current of unity that Mary had never known in her own life. Tall Elk found her as she tried to help the healer grind herbs. His face was grave, his tone low. "Your husband is not a man who bluffs. He will return. When he does, he will not come with 3 men. He will come with more." Mary's throat tightened. "He always said he'd never let me go." Tall Elk's eyes narrowed. "Then why did you run?" The question cut deep. She swallowed hard, glancing at her shawl. Because some things are worse than death." He did not press further, but his gaze lingered on the fabric, as though he sensed what lay hidden beneath. By midday, the camp hummed with preparation. Boys practiced with bows under the eye of an elder. Women packed bundles of food and skins. The healer moved between them, murmuring words of strength. Even laughter, brittle but real, rose in short bursts among the children. Mary tried to busy herself, but the shawl pressed heavier against her chest. Each beat of the drum felt like it was striking through her ribs. She feared not only her husband's wrath, but the moment her secret would slip free, tearing away what fragile trust she had begun to build. As the sun dipped westward, shadows stretching long, the Alpha came to sit beside her at the fire. He studied her silently for a time, then spoke in a voice quiet but sure. "Fear is a river. It carves deep paths. But a river can be turned if you give it new ground." Mary shook her head. "You don't understand. My fear is not just for me. If they knew what I carry, if they knew what waits, maybe they would turn me away." The Alpha's gaze did not waver. The people do not turn away from truth, only from lies that poison the fire. Her hands clenched tighter around the shawl. She wanted to confess, to spill the secret burning her throat, but the words stuck, heavy as stone. That night the drumbeat sounded again, slower this time, echoing like a heartbeat through the camp. The warriors danced briefly around the fire, their shadows leaping high against the cliff walls. The women sang a low, steady chant. Mary sat among them, her voice caught between silence and song. When the fire burned low, tall elk passed her, pausing only long enough to murmur, "Whatever you hide, it will find its way to light." Secrets do not sleep, Mary shivered, clutching the shawl tighter. Far beyond the ridge, unseen but near, her husband gathered more men. The sound of horses on hard ground whispered faintly through the night, but the camp did not yet hear. Inside her, the storm gathered. Outside, the camp braced for battle. And above them all, the war drum waited, its voice ready to thunder when the riders returned. The night was restless. Coyotes howled beyond the ridges, their cries thin and hungry. But among the Apache scouts perched on high ground, sharper sounds echoed. The faint clatter of hooves, the rasp of harness, the murmur of voices carried low. The riders were out there, gathering strength. At dawn, a scout returned, his face set. He held up a horsehair bridle, its clasp roughly stamped with the letters T.C. Thomas Crane. Mary's breath caught as she saw it. The initials of the man she had fled were staring back at her in steel. The Alpha took it in silence, then laid it across a flat stone before the fire. His people gathered, their eyes grave. "They do not sleep," he said simply. "They gather. Soon they will strike." Mary felt the weight of 100 eyes pressing on her. She wanted to shrink into her shawl, to vanish, but instead she stood trembling, her voice a whisper. "He won't stop. Not until he has what he believes is his." The Alpha turned to her, his gaze heavy but not unkind. "What does he claim as his?" Her lips parted, but the truth stuck. Her hand tightened on the shawl until her knuckles whitened. She could not say it, not yet. Instead, she shook her head. "Me, only me." The Alpha studied her long, then spoke softly. "A man who comes with 20 horses for one woman seeks more than a wife." The truth of it rang through the gathering. A murmur stirred the camp. Fear was present, yes, but so was resolve. That evening, Mary kept to herself. She watched the women mend arrows, watched Tall Elk and 2 others sharpen their blades on whetstones until sparks flew. The sound scraped against her chest. She thought of her husband's hands, cruel, possessive, always striking to remind her of what belonged to him. She thought of what he would do when he learned she had run to the Apache, carrying not just her bruises but something far more precious. As the sun sank, painting the cliffs in blood-colored light, Tall Elk approached her. He set the bridle down near her feet. "This was taken from your husband's camp," he said. The men counted 15 horses at least. "There will be more by the time he moves." Mary's hands trembled as she touched the iron clasp. She remembered her husband branding cattle, his face hard with satisfaction as the mark seared flesh. He had always loved leaving his claim behind, on beasts, on land, and on her. He marked everything, she whispered. "Even me." Tall Elk's brow furrowed. He crouched low, his voice gentler. "Marks fade, spirits heal, but only if the truth is spoken." Her throat closed. She looked away, the words clawing but refusing to climb free. That night, the war drum sounded again, slower than before, its voice resonant and grim. The Alpha led the chant, not a call for blood, but a reminder of strength. Children clutched their mothers. Warriors stood tall, faces painted with shadows of fire. Mary sat near the flames, her shawl wound tight, staring into the blaze, as if it might burn the secret from her. She thought of running again, vanishing into the canyons, sparing these people the wrath that hunted her. But she knew her husband would follow. He always did. Alone, she would not last. And alone, the secret would consume her. By midnight, the scouts returned again. Dust still clung to their hair, their eyes sharp with urgency. "They are closer," one said. "They camp 2 valleys away." More men arrive. "Perhaps 25. The Alpha nodded, his jaw hardening. He turned his gaze over his people. "We stand. Not as many, not as armed, but together. Their fire burns hot, but it will pass." Those burns steady. The bridle lay by the fire, its iron glinting. Mary stared at it, her chest tight. She felt the eyes of Tall Elk upon her, the quiet understanding of the healer, the unwavering patience of the Alpha. And for the first time, she understood. Her silence was not only her burden now, it was theirs as well. But still she could not yet tell them. Above, the stars wheeled indifferent, but closer to the earth. Riders gathered. The storm was moving. The riders came at dawn. Not all at once, not in a charge, but like wolves circling. Small groups testing the edges of the canyon, letting their horses clatter against stone so the sound carried far into the camp. Their laughter floated sharp and mean through the morning air. The Apache scouts had seen them moving in the night and were ready. At the canyon's edge, where the rocks narrowed into a natural choke, Tall Elk and 3 others waited with bows drawn. Mary crouched farther back among the women, heart hammering, every breath catching on fear and guilt. The first rider rounded the bend, a scout of her husband's band. He leaned forward in his saddle, rifle slung low. Before he could raise it, an arrow flew, striking him square in the shoulder. His cry split the air, the horse rearing before bolting back toward the others. The Apache melted into the rocks, vanishing before return fire found them. The echoes of gunshots cracked against the cliffs, but no bodies fell. It was not yet a battle, only the testing of teeth. Mary pressed her hand against her shawl, trembling. She knew her husband would not be patient. He never had been. The moment one of his men bled, his fury would rise like wildfire. By midday, the riders had regrouped on the ridge across from camp. Dust rose around them, and through it Mary saw him, Thomas Crane, his hat pulled low, his frame broad in the saddle. He looked as she remembered, hard eyes, jaw clenched. A man who saw everything as property. Her knees weakened. Even from across the canyon, she felt his presence like a chain thrown around her throat. The Alpha stood tall beside her. He met her husband's gaze across the divide, lifting his chin in silent defiance. No words were exchanged, yet the meaning was clear. This was Apache ground. He would not step freely. Scouts loosed a few arrows to drive the riders back, but Thomas only laughed, his voice carrying cruel and sharp. "You can hide behind redskins, Mary, but you'll come back to me." One way or another, the words cut her deeper than the memory of his fists. She bit her lip until she tasted blood, her secret burning louder in her chest. If the Apaches knew, if he shouted it across the canyon, her world would crumble. But he did not speak it yet. He only turned his horse and rode back into the dust. When evening came, the Alpha gathered his people. Around the fire, the painted drum beat steady, holding courage in its rhythm. He spoke plainly. "They test our strength. Tomorrow, they will push harder. We cannot run. The canyon gives us walls, and walls can hold." Tall Elk stepped forward. In his hand, he carried the arrow he had loosed that morning. Its shaft had split when it struck stone, half buried in the canyon floor. He held it up. Even broken, it found its mark. "So shall we," the people murmured in agreement. Fear lingered, but unity pressed stronger. Mary sat apart, staring at the broken arrow. It mirrored her and split, but not yet useless. Perhaps even in brokenness, there was strength. The healer laid a hand on her shoulder. "You fear not the battle, but the man." Mary nodded, unable to speak. The healer's voice softened. "Then tell us why, child." Secrets weigh heavier than wounds. Mary's throat closed. She wanted to confess, to tell them that what her husband sought was not just her, but what she carried beneath her shawl. But the words clung stubborn, too dangerous, too raw. Instead, she whispered, "He will never stop." The healer squeezed her shoulder gently. "Then neither will we." That night, the camp kept watch in silence. The broken arrow lay beside the fire, a quiet reminder that the first blood had already been drawn. And in the darkness, beyond the ridges, Thomas Crane and his men prepared for the next strike, their campfires burning like hungry eyes in the night. The second dawn broke red as blood across the ridges. The Apaches awoke to smoke drifting low through the canyon, the bitter scent of burned sage and pine clinging to the air. Thomas Crane's men had set fire to the ridge grasses, driving the smoke downhill to choke the camp. Children coughed as their mothers pressed wet cloths to their faces. Warriors rushed to stamp out sparks that leapt toward the lodges. Panic threatened, but the Alpha's voice cut steady through the haze. "Hold ground. Smoke is only smoke. Breathe slow." Watch the ridges. Mary stood frozen, shawl clutched around her, the crackle of burning grass rattling in her bones. Her husband's cruelty had always found fire. A lamp knocked to the floor in rage, a hearth overturned when whiskey soured his mood. She remembered running barefoot across scorched boards once, her feet blistering. Now, that memory returned with the smoke. Tall Elk and two others dashed to the canyon rim, loosing arrows into the shapes that flickered behind the smoke curtain. Shouts and curses answered, gunfire sparking against rock. One Apache fell, struck in the thigh, but was carried swiftly back, alive. The canyon walls echoed with chaos, smoke, shots, and the screams of startled horses. In the swirl of confusion, one of the riders dropped a torch, its flames sputtering but alive. It tumbled down the slope, landing near the camp's edge. Mary ran instinctively, grabbing a blanket to smother it before the dry grass caught. She slammed the cloth down, choking the fire, her hands blistering from heat. When she lifted the blanket, only smoke rose. The camp watched her in silence for a moment. She coughed, trembling, but forced herself to stand straight. The Alpha approached, nodding once. Fire can destroy, but fire can also be killed by steady hands. His words steadied her, though inside she shook with fear. The riders pulled back after their smoke raid, their laughter trailing into the distance. But the damage was done, one man wounded, the camp's nerves frayed. Everyone knew this was only the beginning. That evening, as the healer dressed the wounded scout's leg, Mary sat nearby, scrubbing the soot from her palms. Tall Elk lowered himself beside her. "You fought the fire," he said quietly. "I only smothered it," she whispered. "That is fighting," he replied. After a pause, his eyes searched hers. "But you still hold something heavier than flames. What does he want, Mary? Why does he gather so many for one woman?" Her lips trembled. She wanted to answer, but the words tangled in her throat. Finally she said, "Because I carry what he thinks belongs only to him, and he will burn the world to have it." Tall Elk studied her, but did not press further. He only nodded once, as though planting her half-confession deep inside himself. Later, around the fire, the Alpha struck the painted drum once more. Its voice echoed firm and low. "The fire did not break us. Tomorrow they will try again. But as long as our flame burns steady, we stand." The people answered with chants, their voices rough but resolute. Children clapped, women sang, warriors lifted weapons. And yet, Mary sat apart, clutching her shawl so tightly she feared the threads might snap. When the camp quieted, she slipped away into the shadows. At the canyon rim, she looked east. In the distance, she could see faint firelight, her husband's camp glowing like a chain of embers across the hills. Her secret pressed hard against her chest. She thought of the day he would shout it aloud, strip her of the fragile trust she had found here, and leave her with nothing but ash. The torch she had smothered lay nearby, its head blackened but still faintly warm. She picked it up, staring at it. Once it had been a weapon, now it was nothing but charred wood. She wondered if she too could burn down and still stand. Behind her, the Alpha's voice carried softly through the night air. "Shadows grow long before dawn, but they do not last. You must decide if you will step from them, Mary." She did not answer, but she held the blackened torch in both hands, as if weighing her own fate. The sun had not yet reached its full height when the sound of hooves thundered across the ridge. This time the riders did not come with smoke and sparks. They came with guns, ropes, and hunger in their eyes. Children were rushed into the caves, women armed with bows and knives, warriors painted their faces with ash. The Alpha strode through the camp, every movement calm but sharp as a drawn blade. His voice carried over the canyon. "Stand firm. Today they test us. Today we answer." Mary clutched her shawl as she crouched by the fire pit, heart hammering. The memory of her husband's temper filled her ears, louder than the drumbeat of hooves. She had seen him storm through houses like this, smashing, burning, shouting. But never before had she been on the other side of his wrath. The riders burst through the smoke line at the ridge, rifles cracking. Splinters of rock flew where bullets struck. One young warrior lifted a carved wooden shield, painted with red lightning bolts. It caught 2 shots before splitting down the center, shards scattering across the ground. He staggered, cut by splinters, but still stood with his bow drawn. The Alpha raised his spear high and roared. Arrows flew in a black cloud, horses reared, and the canyon exploded into chaos. Mary ducked behind a rock as one of the white riders tumbled from his saddle, an arrow deep in his chest. Another swung a rope, catching a young Apache by the throat, dragging him through the dust. The Alpha leapt forward, spear flashing, cutting the rope before the boy could choke. The rider reeled back, struck from his horse by tall elk's blade. The sound of steel clashing, rifles firing, horses screaming, it all thundered against the canyon walls. Mary pressed her hands to her ears, trembling. This was no small raid. This was war. Through the dust she caught sight of Thomas Crane himself. His hat brim low, rifle gleaming in the sun, his mouth twisted in fury. He shouted orders, his voice cutting above the din. His eyes scanned the canyon, searching for her. Mary's breath caught. For a moment, she thought his gaze landed on her, piercing the smoke. She ducked lower, heart pounding. The Apaches pressed back with ferocity, driving the riders toward the rim. One horse screamed, toppled over the cliff, its rider tumbling after. The sound of bones breaking on rock below echoed sickeningly. Still, Crane's men surged, pouring lead and fire into the canyon. A lodge went up in flames, the hide walls curling black. Women rushed to tear it down before the fire spread. Mary ran to help, slapping at sparks with her shawl, the smoke burning her eyes. Then a bullet whined past, grazing her arm. She cried out, clutching the burn, blood seeping through the fabric. Her knees weakened, but she forced herself upright. Around her the world spun, fire, smoke, screams. The Alpha appeared beside her, pulling her back behind a rock. His eyes burned with fury, but his voice remained steady. "Fear is fire. Do not let it consume you." She nodded, tears streaking through soot on her face. The battle raged for what felt like hours. At last, with their numbers thinned and horses wounded, Crane's men retreated, dragging their dead behind them. Their shouts faded over the ridge, but the silence left behind was broken. Bleeding, the camp smoldered. One lodge lost, 2 warriors dead, 3 more wounded. The boy who had held the painted shield sat weeping quietly as he clutched the splintered remains. The Alpha knelt, placing a hand on his shoulder. "A shield breaks, but the arm that holds it does not. You live. You fight again." Mary sank to her knees, shawl wrapped tight around her bleeding arm. The camp bustled with healing, mourning, and rebuilding. She stared at the broken shield lying in the dust, its red paint now darkened with blood. Her secret pulsed in her chest, heavier than the wound on her arm. She knew her husband would not stop. Not until he had her. Not until the truth she hid came spilling out. That night, as the Alpha beat the drum low and steady, Mary sat apart with tall elk. The stars burned sharp above the smoke haze. "He will come again," tall elk said quietly. "Yes," she whispered, "and when he does, your secret will burn with him." Mary's hands trembled around her shawl. She did not answer, for she could not yet choose which fire she would walk through, her husband's or the Alpha's. But the broken shield lay in her thoughts, and she wondered if she, too, would splinter when the next storm came. The embers of the raid still glowed in the canyon, smoke curling like restless spirits above the broken lodge poles. Though Thomas Crane and his men had retreated, no one believed the battle was finished. The Apache camp breathed in whispers. Every shadow stretched long with suspicion. That night, the warriors gathered around the fire circle. The carved pipe, made of red stone, its stem bound in eagle feathers, was brought forth. Among the people, it was not simply smoked. It was a vow. Whoever touched the pipe declared their loyalty, binding themselves to truth before the fire and the spirits who watched. The Alpha held the pipe, the flames dancing across his stern face. His gaze moved slowly across the circle, resting on Mary at the edge. She sat wrapped in her shawl, wounded arm bandaged, eyes lowered. She knew what this meant. Trust was not asked in words here. It was shown. One by one, the warriors pressed the pipe to their lips, exhaling into the fire, sealing their pledge to defend the canyon and the life within it. When the pipe came to Mary, silence fell. Her hands trembled as she accepted it, the carved stone cool against her palms. She lifted it as the others had, but when she breathed out, the smoke caught in her throat. For a moment, she feared the silence in her chest would betray her. Still she exhaled, and the smoke curled into the flames. But she knew, as did the Alpha, that her heart carried more than she had spoken. Not all eyes in the circle were kind. One warrior named Whitehawk narrowed his gaze. He had watched her since the night she arrived, his mistrust carved into every glance. When the pipe returned to the Alpha, Whitehawk stood. "She carries Crane's blood," he said sharply. His fury follows her. "She brings him to our fires. And when he comes, we bury our children." The circle stirred, voices rising in anger and fear. Mary's breath caught. Her heart thundered as the faces around her blurred. The Alpha lifted his hand, silencing the storm. "She carries truth," he said. "And the truth we do not yet see will be revealed when the spirits choose." But the words did not calm all hearts. That night Mary felt the weight of eyes even in the shadows. She could not sleep. Her wound burned, her secret twisted inside her like a knife. In the darkness she overheard whispers, not Apache but English. A voice low and hurried, speaking beyond the canyon walls. She crept toward the sound, each step sinking her deeper into dread. At the edge of the ridge, she saw him. Whitehawk, crouched with a pale-faced rider, exchanging words in the flicker of a lantern. Her blood ran cold. A traitor. She pressed herself into the rocks, straining to hear. "Crane will come at dawn," the rider muttered. "He says the woman is his. Keep her in the canyon. When the fight begins, you deliver her to him. Then you will have your reward." Mary's breath hitched. A pebble shifted beneath her foot. Whitehawk's head snapped toward the sound, eyes searching the dark. She fled, heart slamming in her chest, back into the safety of the canyon. By the time she returned to the dying embers of the fire, her decision was set. She could not keep her silence much longer. If Crane came again, if Whitehawk betrayed them, her secret would destroy more than herself. But dawn was not yet upon them, and fear pressed heavier than the night. When morning came, Mary sat with Tall Elk near the fire. She told him only fragments, that Whitehawk spoke with her husband's riders, that the camp was no longer safe. Tall Elk's jaw tightened, his hand curling around the hilt of his knife. "You must tell the Alpha," he urged. But Mary shook her head, tears brimming. "Not yet. My secret," her voice faltered. "When it is spoken, there will be no turning back." Tall Elk stared at her for a long moment, then nodded with the grim patience of one who understood burdens. That evening, the Alpha once again lit the carved pipe. He looked at each face, searching for fractures. Mary swallowed hard, her lips dry as the desert wind. In the fire's glow, she thought she saw Whitehawk's smirk, the shadow of betrayal hidden in plain sight. The pipe passed, the smoke rose, the fire cracked. And with each breath into the flames, Mary knew the hour was drawing near when no vow, no prayer, no silence would hold back the storm her secret carried. The canyon was still when the first pale light crept over the ridges. The warriors of the camp stirred, weary but vigilant. Mary, wrapped in her shawl, had not slept. She watched the horizon with the dread of one who already knew what was coming. The sound came first. Hooves, faint but steady, carried on the morning air. Her body went rigid. A hawk circled above, crying out as if warning them of what approached. The Alpha stepped into the clearing, his posture tall, his eyes sharp. He held no weapon yet, but his presence alone was steel. Warriors gathered, bows in hand, arrows fitted. Women and children were guided back into the deeper caves, their footsteps muffled by the dust, and then the riders appeared. A line of them, dark against the growing light, led by Thomas Crane. He rode with his shoulders back, as though he owned not only the men behind him, but the very sun rising over the ridge. Between their horses, stretched high, was a banner of white cloth, the universal sign of truce. Yet Mary's stomach turned. She remembered Crane's words, his cunning. She knew a flag of peace in his hand was nothing but a blade in disguise. The Apache warriors murmured in unease. Whitehawk was among them, his face unreadable, though Mary felt the weight of his betrayal pressing harder now than ever. Crane's voice carried across the canyon. I come not for war. I come for what is mine. His eyes fixed on Mary, and the weight of his gaze pinned her where she stood. Return the woman, and no blood need be spilled. The Alpha's reply was calm, measured, but there was no weakness in it. She stands beneath my fire. While she remains here, she's not yours to claim. The men behind Crane shifted restlessly. Their rifles gleamed in the morning light. The banner swayed. Mary's breath caught. She knew the script of her husband's cruelty too well. It happened quickly. The white cloth dropped. The rifles lifted. Gunfire cracked the silence of dawn. Arrows hissed in answer. Horses reared, men shouted, dust exploded into the air. The battle surged like a storm, breaking free of its chains. Mary ducked behind the rocks as bullets struck the canyon wall. Her ears rang, her heart thundered. She clutched the shawl around her shoulders like a shield, though it could do nothing against iron. She saw Tall Elk charge forward, spear raised, his cry echoing off the cliffs. The Alpha stood firm at the center, his bow singing, arrows finding their mark with merciless precision. Yet the numbers pressed in. Crane had brought twice the men of before. Mary's eyes searched desperately. Where was Whitehawk? She caught a glimpse. There, slipping through the smoke toward her, not with the others but apart. His eyes locked with hers, and in them she saw it. The intent to deliver her to Crane. She fled deeper into the canyon, her wound burning, her breath ragged. Stones cut her feet as she stumbled toward the caves where the women and children hid. Behind her, Whitehawk pursued, his shadow gaining, but fate twisted in the smoke. A rifle shot cracked, striking the banner that trailed across the ground. The white cloth, no longer pure, darkened as it soaked up blood from a fallen rider. The banner, once a lie of peace, became the truth of war. The Apache fought with desperate ferocity. Crane's men, though many, faltered under the fury of defenders who knew every stone, every bend of the canyon. Still, the price was high. Bodies fell, dust choked the air, and blood seeped into the thirsty soil. Mary pressed herself against the cave wall, gasping. She could hear Whitehawk's footsteps nearing, hear his breath. Her hand found a stone, rough and jagged, the only weapon within reach. He emerged from the smoke, eyes burning. "You belong to him," he hissed. "Your presence brings ruin here." Her hand trembled, but she raised the stone. Before she could act, another figure appeared, Tall Elk, bloodied but alive, his spear thrust forward. The weapon struck, and Whitehawk staggered. His betrayal ended in silence. Mary dropped the stone, her hands shaking. Tall Elk's eyes met hers, not with triumph, but with sorrow. "The Alpha must know," he said simply, and in that moment Mary felt it pressing upon her, her secret, no longer hidden by shadows. With the blood-stained banner trampled in the dust, the hour of revelation had come nearer than ever. The canyon lay scarred by smoke and silence. The battle at dawn had faded into uneasy stillness, bodies strewn like shadows across the earth. Vultures circled overhead, but the Apache stood tall among the ruins, battered yet unbroken. Mary's chest heaved as she emerged from the caves. Her eyes swept the camp, catching the sight of Whitehawk's lifeless body lying at the edge of the fire circle. His betrayal was ended, but his treachery lingered like a poison in the air. The Alpha walked slowly among his people, his steps deliberate, his expression grave. He carried the weight of leadership, but his gaze flickered often toward Mary, as though he knew the storm within her had not yet broken. Tall Elk approached him, his spear bloodied, his voice steady. She saw Whitehawk with Crane's rider. She knew what was coming. His glance fell on Mary. "But there is more she has not said." The Alpha's eyes lingered on her. "It is time." Mary's knees weakened. Her shawl clung to her shoulders, its folds heavy with dust, blood, and memory. From within it, her trembling hand pulled forth the small silver locket she had hidden since the night she fled. The warriors gathered, silent, their faces carved in firelight and smoke. Even the children, drawn from the caves, stood in stillness as though the earth itself waited for her words. Mary opened the locket with a soft click. Inside, wrapped carefully in parchment, was a lock of fine golden hair and a folded scrap of paper, its ink smudged but legible. Her voice quivered as she spoke. "This is not only my burden, it is his." She raised her eyes toward the ridge, where she knew Crane still lingered beyond the canyon walls, watching, waiting. The Alpha took the letter gently from her hand and unfolded it. His dark eyes scanned the words, his jaw tightening as he read aloud. "To Thomas Crane, from Dr. Harlan, St. Louis. The child you claim is not of your blood. The tests confirm what you feared. She is born of another." Gasps stirred through the circle. Mary's breath hitched, her tears flowing freely now. "He beat me because of this. He called me a liar, a whore. But I swear to you, it was not betrayal. It was salvation." Her voice cracked. "The child was not his, but neither was she, Apache. She was mine, and she was lost." Her hands shook as she touched the lock of hair. "She died because of his rage. And I fled, not only from his hand, but from the memory of her cries. I sought shelter where her spirit might rest, among those who knew sorrow and yet carried it with honor." The Alpha's expression softened, but the silence of the camp was heavy, uncertain. One warrior muttered, "She brings the enemy's wrath with her secret." But Tall Elk shook his head. "No, it is not her shame. It is his." He looked toward the horizon where Crane's riders still lingered, faint figures against the rising sun. Mary's voice steadied, though her tears did not cease. "Crane believes I dishonored him, but the truth is that his dishonor lies in his own cruelty. He killed his own child in his fury. That is why he hunts me, not to reclaim a wife, but to silence the truth." The Alpha stepped forward, his presence commanding silence. He held the locket high, the firelight gleaming off its silver face. "This is no longer her burden. It belongs to us all. If he seeks to silence truth, then he must come through the fire of those who guard it." The warriors bowed their heads, their resolve deepening. For them, the secret was no longer just Mary's grief. It was a battle for dignity, for the right of truth to live even when surrounded by cruelty. Mary fell to her knees, exhausted, but the Alpha's hand lifted her gently. His voice, calm and low, carried the strength of stone. "You are no longer alone." From beyond the ridge, a horn blew, Crane's call. The next storm would soon break. Yet in the canyon, the air had shifted. No longer was Mary a stranger with shadows in her eyes. She was part of the fire now, her secret no longer hidden, but woven into the tribe's own story. The Alpha closed the locket, placing it back into her hands. "Keep this," he said, "not as a wound, but as a blade. Truth cuts deeper than steel." And as the sun rose higher, the canyon prepared not for despair, but for the reckoning that waited at its gates. The sun burned high above the canyon, its light falling mercilessly upon the land. Dust rose where Crane's men gathered at the ridge, their silhouettes black against the horizon. The horn call still echoed, carried by the wind, a herald of the final storm. Within the canyon, the Apache stood ready. Warriors lined the walls, bows drawn, spears firm in their grip. The Alpha stood at their head, calm as stone, his eyes fixed on the place where Crane would descend. His silence was not absence of fear, it was command, the strength of a leader who knew the land would speak for him. Mary stood behind him, the locket pressed tightly in her palm. Her breath trembled, but her shoulders did not bow. She was no longer the woman who had stumbled into their fire broken and afraid. She was scarred, but her secret had been spoken, and truth gave her the courage of iron. The sound of hooves thundered as Crane's riders charged down the slope. His voice rose above the clamor, hard and venomous. "Bring her out, or I will burn this canyon until nothing lives." The Alpha stepped forward, lifting his bow. His voice rang clear, "She is not yours." She never was. "And today your fire ends." The first volley of arrows streaked into the dust. Riders fell, horses shrieked, rifles cracked in reply. Smoke filled the air, echoing the Battle of Dawn. But this time the Apache fought not only for their survival, but for Mary's truth. Crane rode at the center, rifle in hand, his eyes wild. He saw Mary across the chaos, and rage twisted his face. He drove his horse forward, forcing his way into the canyon, cutting down any who stood before him. Mary's heart hammered as he came nearer. She felt the weight of every bruise, every night of fear, every word of cruelty. Yet she did not step back. She lifted her chin, her eyes unflinching. Tall Elk leapt to intercept, his spear flashing, but Crane's rifle cracked, and Tall Elk fell to the ground, his cry swallowed by the storm. Mary gasped, but his eyes met hers even as he fell, urging her to stand. The Alpha confronted Crane in the fire's circle. They circled each other, one with a bow, the other with steel. Crane fired, but the arrow flew first, striking his shoulder and spinning him from the saddle. His rifle clattered against the stones. He staggered to his feet, blood soaking his sleeve, fury still burning. He lunged for the rifle, but Mary was faster. She seized it, the cold iron heavy in her hands. For a moment the canyon froze. Crane's eyes met hers, the same eyes that had once struck terror into her every waking hour. His voice, hoarse with rage, broke the silence. "You'll never be free of me. You're mine till the grave." Mary's hands shook, not from fear, but from the weight of choice. She lifted the rifle, aimed at him, and in her eyes there was no longer submission, only defiance. The Alpha's voice cut through the silence. "The fire is yours to end," Crane sneered, stepping closer, daring her. "Do it. You haven't the courage." But Mary's courage was not the courage of killing. It was the courage of breaking chains. With a cry, she raised the rifle high and slammed it against the stones. The wood splintered, the barrel bent, the weapon broken beyond use. The sound rang out like thunder, louder than any gunshot. Crane stared stunned as the truth struck him harder than any bullet. She was beyond his reach, beyond his control. The Apache surged forward, surrounding him. His men, leaderless and faltering, broke into retreat, scattering back toward the ridges. The canyon swallowed them in dust. Crane, bleeding and broken, was forced to his knees. The Alpha stood over him, bow drawn, but his eyes sought Mary. "What is his fate?" he asked. Mary's breath shuddered. She looked at the man who had stolen her years, her child, her peace. Hatred burned, but beneath it was a deeper resolve. She spoke softly, but her words carried the weight of stone. "His fate is to live knowing he has lost everything." The Alpha lowered his bow. Crane was cast from the canyon, stripped of his weapon, his banner, and his men. The dust closed around him as he vanished into the wasteland, no longer master of anyone's fate, but his own ruin. Silence fell over the canyon once more. The warriors laid their fallen to rest, and the fires were rekindled. Mary sat by the flames, the locket in her hand, its silver face warm from the glow. She looked at the Alpha, and for the first time since her arrival, she felt not like a fugitive, but like a soul returned to the circle of life. The Alpha placed the broken rifle at the edge of the fire. "This," he said, "reminds us that no weapon holds power greater than truth." Mary bowed her head. In her silence was peace. In her heart was freedom. And in the canyon's fire she found what she had never known. Not merely shelter, but belonging.